My wealthy in-laws tried to steal custody of my kids to control our family. Me, 38F, and my husband Frank, 40M, have been married for 12 years. We have 2 kids, Timmy, 10M, and Emma, 8F. Frank comes from a wealthy family who made their fortune in real estate development. His parents are Richard, 68M, and Karen, 65F. Richard was always a controlling, narcissistic man who lorded his money and success over others. He never approved of my middle-class background and treated me like a gold digger after Frank when we got married. Karen was a dutiful wife who enabled Richard's awful behavior. Despite their wealth, they were miserly and made every interaction about flaunting their money or delivering backhanded insults about our more modest lifestyle. They constantly tried to undermine my role as a mom by criticizing how I raised the kids. A few years ago, Richard and Karen decided to establish a family trust fund for their grandchildren, Timmy and Emma. We were grateful for their generosity, despite their usual belittling comments about finally doing something meaningful with their money. The trust stipulated that the funds could only be accessed once the kids turned 25 for specific approved purposes like education, a home purchase, or starting a business. It seemed like a reasonable way to help secure their future. However, there were additional clauses that Frank and I vehemently disagreed with. If either of us were convicted of a crime, got divorced, or if I somehow lost custody of the kids, we would be immediately removed as trustees. Sole control would revert to Richard and Karen. A few months ago, I stumbled across some paperwork that made my blood boil. It was an amendment that Richard and Karen made to the trust without our knowledge or consent. They had added an absolutely despicable clause. If at any time Richard and Karen decided that Frank and I were inadequate parents based on their judgment, they could remove us as trustees and obtain full custody of our children until they turned 25. This gave them terrifying power to basically kidnap our kids on a whim, and we'd be powerless to stop it as long as we wanted access to the fund. It was a sick ploy to maintain control over us and the grandkids. I immediately showed Frank the paperwork and we were both sickened by his parents' deplorable actions. We realized they had been trying to overstep boundaries more frequently, no doubt trying to manufacture a scenario that let them claim we were unfit parents. The final straw was when Richard had made comments about sending Timmy to an elite private school, saying the public school he attended wasn't rigorous enough. It was an unnecessary expense we couldn't afford and a clear attempt to overrule our choices as parents. At that moment, we promised that we would do whatever it took to remove Richard and Karen's control over our family once and for all. If they wanted to wage a war over our children, we would show no mercy. We invited Richard and Karen over for dinner, pleading ignorance about the trust amendment. As we expected, they arrogantly admitted to making the changes and reiterated their belief that we were incapable of properly raising their grandchildren. I calmly laid out how ethically and legally wrong their actions were. But Richard just laughed in my face, saying he had both the money and the law on his side to do whatever he pleased. Frank finally had enough of his father's deplorable behavior. In a moment I'll never forget, he yelled, "Then we'll just have to make sure you don't have any money left to abuse." Richard was briefly taken aback by Frank's outbursts before reverting to form. He ranted about how Frank was brainwashed by his poor wife's trashy family and stormed out, vowing to make us pay dearly. Over the next few weeks, Richard constantly harassed us with guilt-tripping calls and text messages about breaking our family apart. He accused me of turning Frank against his own parents through lies and manipulation. Karen was more subtle, alternating between fake kindness asking us to reconsider and ominous warnings that we would live to regret making an enemy of her husband. We knew they were absolutely determined to seize control of our lives by any means necessary. Frank and I started consulting lawyers to explore our options for striking back. In the meantime, we also gathered as much evidence as possible about Richard's deplorable conduct as a trustee and personal behavior towards us over the years. I purchased an audio recorder to secretly capture him spewing vitriol and threats during his rants. One particularly vile recording that made me physically ill was Richard speculating about us getting into a fatal car accident that would leave the kids as orphans under his care. His solution to the situation: we compiled records of him mismanaging the trust funds, mixing personal and trust assets, as well as making decisions about the trust that violated its legal provisions without our input. He had a history of unethical behavior when it came to exploiting legal loopholes for his personal gain. While amassing our case against Richard, we consulted a wonderful lawyer named Claire who unfortunately confirmed our worst fear. Based on the unethical but legal paperwork, Richard and Karen technically did have the power to claim full custody if they could prove we were unfit parents based on their judgment. However, Claire saw a potential path to fight back by questioning how such a subjective criteria could ever be fairly applied. She believed we had strong evidence of Richard's malicious intent and violation of trustee duties that could persuade a judge to remove their custodial provision altogether. It would be an uphill battle, but if we launched preemptive legal strikes focused on proving them as unfit trustees through their own actions, we could hopefully kill their custody play before it started. With Claire's guidance, we initiated a legal case against Richard for breaching his fiduciary duties as a trustee of the kids' trust fund. The evidence we compiled showed a clear pattern of him exploiting the trust for personal financial gain and making unilateral decisions that violated its terms. We claimed the outrageous custody provision he added was the prime example of this. It solely benefited his own desires while putting the beneficiaries, our children, at risk of severe emotional trauma. Simultaneously, I filed an order of protection against Richard on behalf of myself and the kids due to his escalating harassment and threats of violence that I captured on the secret audio recordings. Richard laughed off our legal salvo as a desperate act of petty revenge. But he was shaken when the judge temporarily suspended his custodial rights and financial authority over the trust after our emergency orders. Infuriated that his control was slipping, Richard sought to regain leverage by airing our family's dirty laundry. He sent letters to my entire extended family which contained vile lies that I was a neglectful mother addicted to drugs and alcohol who physically abused my own kids. He claimed the custody provision only existed because Frank and I were dangerously unfit parents who posed a severe safety risk to Timmy and Emma. Richard shamelessly pleaded with my relatives to speak up in his favor at our next hearing. While most of my family dismissed Richard's absurd fabrications, a few ill-informed relatives did echo his sentiments based on partial truths he twisted. This threatened to undermine our case that Richard was acting solely out of malice rather than valid concern. Facing an unexpectedly tough legal battle, Frank and I decided to go scorched earth. We hired private investigators to dig into every aspect of Richard's personal and business affairs looking for any ammo we could use. They struck gold when they uncovered Richard had been grossly inflating property values for years to avoid paying his full tax obligations. He had been systematically ripping off the government for millions in unreported gains. Armed with concrete evidence of Richard's tax evasion, we secretly provided it to the IRS and the State Tax Commission. We knew they would likely initiate a criminal investigation that could land Richard in prison once they scrutinized his finances. We held that grenade hoping his imminent legal troubles over his personal criminal acts would force him to back off his vendetta against us. But Richard's arrogance and obsession was too strong. He pressed on, unwavering in his quest to take our children from us. Over the next several months, the legal situation devolved into an all-out war consuming our lives and finances. Despite the mounting evidence of Richard's unethical actions, the judge remained hesitant to definitively terminate his custody claims. In a shocking development, the IRS did indict Richard on dozens of counts of tax evasion we had anonymously tipped them off about. His prolonged prison sentence effectively nullified his efforts to pursue custody through the courts. However, Karen shockingly then tried to take up the mantle herself with her own case claiming we were still unfit parents. Without the ability to contest this through ongoing litigation, Claire advised us to negotiate a settlement terminating any future custody claims in exchange for keeping the trust fund intact for our kids. While disgusted at having to make any deal, we accepted it was likely our only way to ensure permanent safety without bankrupting ourselves through years of court battles. It at least preserved the existence and assets of the trust fund. Richard ended up serving 5 years in federal prison for tax evasion and was permanently barred from regaining authority over the trust based on his conviction. The courts terminated his contingency custody rights completely. As part of the settlement, we agreed not to pursue civil lawsuits over Richard's egregious conduct as a trustee in exchange for Karen dropping her custody case. An independent trustee was appointed to administer the fund going forward. The custody provision was struck down entirely, closing the dark chapter. I wish I could say Karen faced consequences for her role, but she never spent a day behind bars. At Claire's advisement, we terminated the order of protection to show good faith in the negotiations. While affirmed that she would never get custody of our children, Karen remained completely unapologetic, vindicated in her belief that we were inadequate parents. Her narcissism and disdain remained as virulent as ever. Even though we won by ensuring Timmy and Emma's future safety, it was a hollow victory. The multi-year legal battle took an immense emotional and financial toll that strained our marriage nearly to its breaking point. The vile allegations Richard made about me still haunted my relationship with some family members who continued to view me with skepticism. Most painfully, Timmy had read some of Richard's letters and asked if the disturbing claims about me were true. While my kids were therapy to process the traumatic turmoil, I struggled deeply. The psychological warfare of having my fitness as a mother constantly attacked left me anxious and depressed for a long time. I questioned my self-worth and whether I was in fact a terrible parent like they claimed. It took years to regain my confidence and ego. Even today, I remain guarded about allowing new people into our lives and have trouble not automatically questioning their intentions or judgment of my family. If there's one big takeaway from my family's harrowing ordeal, it's to carefully scrutinize any arrangement that could give someone else power over your children. We blindly trusted Richard and Karen's ostensible good intentions with the trust, and it nearly allowed them to tear our lives apart irreparably. While they may have been wealthy, their cold-hearted inability to prioritize the emotional well-being of their grandchildren over their own narcissistic quest for control will hopefully serve as a stark warning to other families. Money can never compensate for the trauma and damage they inflicted upon us. I truly believe they deserve to live the rest of their lives alone, suffering the consequences of having destroyed their relationship with their own son and grandchildren over the worst of human impulses, greed and jealousy. I would go through our years-long battle 1,000 times over to protect my babies. But I wish to God I could get back the precious years and moments of peace that were stolen from us as a family. Break story 2. Me, 38F, and my husband, 42M, had been married for 15 years. We have 2 wonderful kids, a son, 12M, and a daughter, 10F. My husband's family has always been a bit difficult. His parents, my in-laws, 68M and 65F, are wealthy and have always looked down on me for coming from a middle-class background. They were never overtly rude, but their subtle jabs and condescending remarks made it clear that they didn't think I was good enough for their precious son. Despite this, we tried to maintain a civil relationship for the sake of the kids. Little did I know, their true colors would soon be revealed in the most heart-wrenching way possible. A few years ago, my father-in-law's health took a turn for the worse. He was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer and given only a few months to live. In his final days, he decided to update his will, leaving the bulk of his multi-million-dollar estate to my husband and his sister. We were grateful for the inheritance but more concerned about making his last days comfortable. However, my in-laws had other plans. They insisted on taking control of his care, refusing to let us visit him in the hospital or hospice. We were heartbroken but respected their wishes, hoping to avoid any unnecessary drama during such a difficult time. After my father-in-law passed away, we were called to the lawyer's office to go over the details of the will. That's when the bombshell dropped. My in-laws had secretly made changes to the will, cutting us out entirely and leaving everything to my husband's sister and her family. We were stunned and devastated. How could they do this to us? To their own grandchildren? The lawyer claimed he had no knowledge of any wrongdoing, and the will appeared to be legally binding. We were left with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a mountain of debt. Enraged, we confronted my in-laws, demanding an explanation. They simply shrugged it off, claiming we didn't deserve the inheritance and that their daughter's family needed it more. They even had the audacity to suggest that my husband should have married better. I was livid. How dare they treat us like this after everything we had done for them? We had been there through thick and thin, providing emotional and financial support whenever they needed it. And this was how they repaid us? My husband tried to reason with them, pleading for them to see the error of their ways. But they remained cold and indifferent, dismissing our concerns as if we were nothing more than a nuisance. It was then that I realized the true depths of their cruelty. These were not just entitled, wealthy snobs, they were evil, manipulative narcissists who had no qualms about destroying their own family for personal gain. In a last-ditch effort, we sought legal counsel to challenge the will. But the lawyers warned us that the case was weak, and even if we won, the legal fees would likely bankrupt us. Defeated and heartbroken, we had no choice but to walk away. My in-laws had won, or so they thought. Little did they know, I was just getting started. For months, I seethed with anger, plotting my revenge. I knew I couldn't simply lash out. That would only give them more ammunition against us. No, I needed a plan, a calculated strike that would hit them where it hurt the most, their precious wealth and reputation. I began to gather evidence, documenting every slight, every insult, every instance of their narcissistic behavior. I combed through financial records, searching for any hint of wrongdoing or illegality. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat my husband down and laid out my scheme. At first, he was hesitant, worried about the potential consequences. But as I walked him through the details, he saw the brilliance in my plan. We would expose my in-laws for the greedy, manipulative monsters they truly were. We would take away everything they held dear, their money, their status, their inflated sense of superiority. And we would do it legally, leaving them no recourse but to face the consequences of their actions. The first step was to gather allies. We reached out to other family members who had been mistreated by my in-laws over the years, building a network of support and shared grievances. Next, we began to leak damaging information to the press, stories of their financial misdeeds, their mistreatment of employees, and their general disdain for anyone they deemed beneath them. The media firestorm was immediate and intense. My in-laws' once pristine reputation was quickly tarnished, and their business partners began to distance themselves, fearing guilt by association. But we were just getting started. With the help of our allies, we filed a series of lawsuits against my in-laws, alleging everything from tax evasion to workplace discrimination. The legal battles were long and costly, but we were prepared. We had amassed a mountain of evidence, and our lawyers were some of the best in the business. One by one, the cases began to stack up against them. Meanwhile, the media continued to fan the flames, exposing more and more of their misdeeds. The once untouchable family was quickly becoming a pariah in their own community. As the legal and public relations battles raged on, my in-laws' empire began to crumble. Business deals fell through, investors pulled out, and their once loyal employees started jumping ship. But the final blow came when the IRS launched a full-scale investigation into their financial dealings. They had been meticulous in covering their tracks, but we had managed to uncover a few key discrepancies that set off alarm bells. Within months, they were slapped with a massive tax bill, running into the millions. Unable to pay, they were forced to liquidate their assets, selling off their businesses, properties, and even their beloved vacation homes. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. My in-laws were hit with a barrage of fines and penalties, and my husband's sister was implicated in some of the financial crimes, facing potential jail time. In a desperate attempt to save themselves, they tried to pin the blame on us, accusing us of orchestrating a vast conspiracy to ruin them. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the court saw through their lies. In the end, they were left with nothing: no money, no businesses, no assets. They were stripped of their wealth and their status, reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. As for us, we were finally vindicated. The inheritance that had been so cruelly taken from us was returned, along with substantial damages for the emotional and financial hardship we had endured. But more importantly, we had exposed the truth about my in-laws' true nature. They were no longer able to hide behind their wealth and influence, forced to face the consequences of their actions in the harsh light of public scrutiny. In the aftermath, there was a sense of catharsis, but also a lingering sadness. We had won. But at what cost? Our relationships with my in-laws and their side of the family were irreparably damaged, and the trust between us had been shattered beyond repair. The kids, once so close to their grandparents, were left confused and hurt, struggling to reconcile the people they thought they knew with the monsters we had exposed. And while we had regained our financial security, the emotional toll of the ordeal had taken its toll. There were nights when I would lie awake, haunted by the memories of their betrayal, wondering if our actions had gone too far. In the end, however, I knew that we had done the right thing. We had fought back against a system that so often favors the wealthy and powerful, and we had won. My in-laws had thought they could treat us like disposable pawns, but they had underestimated our resolve and our determination. As I look back on those tumultuous years, I can't help but feel a sense of pride in what we accomplished. We may have lost something in the process, but we gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that we are strong enough to stand up to injustice, no matter how daunting the odds. And who knows? Maybe our story will inspire others to find the courage to fight back against the narcissists and bullies in their lives. Because in the end, that's what true revenge is all about: taking back your power and refusing to be a victim any longer.